And welcome to another edition of Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. There is Mike in his football den in Ontario. Gord is in beautiful suburban Greater Vancouver, and I'm here on Football Island with another edition of the 2-Minute Offense. Cincinnati over South Florida by 4. Nick Mardner with a key contribution in that win. 2 receptions for 22 yards and a tutty. Tavius Robinson had a day for Ole Miss in their manhandling of Vandy. 5 solos and a half TFL. Kurtis Rourke was on fire in MAC action, throwing for 427 and 3 touchdowns, added another 32 yards with his feet. Pittsburgh back to their winning ways with a W over Virginia Tech. Jared Wayne with 4 receptions in this one. Akeem Messidor continues to have a quality year. The problem is the Miami Hurricanes continue to stumble, this time with a 3-point loss to North Carolina. Kevin Sclarcius with a quiet day at UConn, but the Huskies score another win, this time against Florida International. Quebecer Joey Corcoran for New Hampshire continues to light it up. The redshirt freshman with 96 yards receiving on 7 receptions in New Hampshire's win over Stony Brook. Kelowna's Nolan Ulm getting more targets, getting more receptions. Too bad Eastern Washington isn't getting more wins. Iowa, Illinois, a grinding defensive classic. Chase Brown controlled the pace of the game with 31 carries for 146. His brother Sidney, great day, 5 tackles and 2 pass breakups. Kurtis Rourke is 5th in passing in the NCAA, and Chase Brown continues to be 1st in rushing in the NCAA. Gord, it is great to be a Canadian athlete and a leader in the NCAA. Compare these 2 achievements so far.
Well, both impressive achievements. Kurtis Rourke starts last year for the first season at Ohio and has a bit of an up and down year. Nothing that really pops off the page. This year has been a significant and notable step forward for him for sure. For me, of the 2 of them, though, the guy that really impresses me the most is Chase Brown. And the reason for that is the consistency against high-level competition. Illinois now in the thick of Big Ten play in a wide-open Big Ten West. Their last 2 games were big wins against Iowa and against Wisconsin. And Chase Brown was his same old self in both of those games against historically strong defenses in a very, very strong conference. And now all of a sudden, the Illini are in the top 25, well in the top 25, and in a position where they could potentially reach the Big Ten title game if they keep this up. Chase Brown's a guy who's just going to continue to be piling up the accolades if he keeps playing the way he is. And he's been by far, I never would have predicted what we're seeing from Chase Brown at the outset of this season.
I agree with Gord on this one, and it's going to sound like we're taking shots at Kurtis Rourke when we're not, because he's been doing a spectacular job at Ohio as well. But I agree 100%. It's the 2 things that Gord already mentioned, the conference play and the consistency. And when you look at the 2 sort of off games that Rourke had this year, they were against Power 5 teams. It was Penn State, it was Iowa State. And, playing in a tougher conference and being more consistent. The game against Iowa last week, it was kind of, okay, how's he going to do here? And it's a 146-yard performance. So I don't want to say anything bad about Rourke, because he's number 5 in the country. He's doing a spectacular job, but that just shows you how much more the 2 of us at least agree on how spectacular a season Chase Brown is having.
This is the stage of the year where FCS teams start to produce numbers as well, and we've got a couple of Canadians that have really stepped up here. Mike, who pops to mind for you?
Oh, first and foremost, it's Joey Corcoran at New Hampshire, the wide receiver for Montreal. He redshirted last year, so this is his redshirt freshman year, and he had no catches in the first game of the season. Since then, he's become the team's leading receiver in both catches and receiving yards as a redshirt freshman. He's been doing a dynamite job. He's got some size. He's 6'2". He's got really good hops as well. And his head coach, Rick Santos, who's been around the program a long time, just raves about what a student of the game he is. So I'm happy to be able to spotlight some of the guys we haven't talked about a lot, and Corcoran for me is one of those guys.
Yeah, he hasn't quite been what Joey Corcoran's been this fall, but a guy that I've noticed stepping up this year is another guy in the early half of his career, and that's Nolan Alm, the Kelowna, BC native over at Eastern Washington. Now, one of the things that's kind of held Alm back is that Eastern, usually a contender in the Big Sky Conference pretty much every year, has been on an unusually down year this fall. They are now, I believe, 1-4. Their offense has been pretty putrid, again, for a school that's long had a reputation as an offensive powerhouse. But that being said, despite that offense being weak in the modest numbers, Ulm is one of the team leaders in passing and has led them in receiving yards in the past 2 games. He's found the end zone twice so far. And for a guy who, every report I've ever heard about Nolan Ulm has been that this is a guy who thinks differently. Like he thinks like a professional athlete. He is fully dedicated to his craft and what he does. He's a guy that I have zero doubt you will see in the CFL, if not maybe sneak into the NFL in his future. So definitely a name to keep your eye on out here in Spokane, Washington.
So, FCS, FBS, who would make it into our stateside 5? Another week, another trip to the 5 for Tavius Robinson of Guelph. He had 5 solo tackles and split a TFL for Ole Miss. Not many times when a freshman wide receiver jumps out as your team leader, but you can say that about Joey Corcoran at New Hampshire. 7 receptions for 96 yards this week. London's senior defensive back Sidney Brown in his game of renown. 5 tackles and 2 pass breakups in a defensive struggle against Iowa. 163 all-purpose yards for Chase Brown, the NCAA's rushing leader. 13 carries, 146 on the ground exclusively. And in at number 1, it is Kurtis Rourke after putting up 55 against Akron. 24 of 27 for 427 and 3 TDs, and he added 32 yards rushing. Coming up, USports coming out of the turkey break. Welcome back, everyone. Canada West took a week off for Thanksgiving, but for everyone else, it was full steam ahead. We'll tell you about it in our 3-minute warning. Battle of Waterloo, Laurier and the Lou, and it is Quentin Scott leading the way for the Golden Hawks. 22 carries, 184 yards, and 2 touchdowns. A good day on the opposite side of the ball for James Basiliga. 5 receptions, 138 yards, and 2 tutties. Windsor over York, 33-10. Enzo Joe with a forced fumble, block, and 2 tackles for those guys in navy and gold. McMaster and Guelph, this was all about defense for the Marauders. 5 INTs for the defensive side, led by Demetrius Masuka. He had 2 of them. Chris Botchkus with a 38-yard interception return to the house. Western goes into the 4-1-6 and sails by the Varsity Blues. Edward Winati kind of taking over in that tailback position for the Purple Ponies. 213 on the day and 4 trips to the colored end zone. St. FX triples up on Bishops, but here's 2 names we've been calling all season long, 1 on each side of the ball. Gabe Royer with 7 tackles and a sack for Bishops, but it was Malcolm Bussey on the winning side with another 100-yard day, 115 and 2 touchdowns. Acadia Mount A, and this was all about the Vogels to Walker connection. Vogels with 336 through the air and 2 TDs, 126 of those yards hauled in by Robert Walker, who had both of those trips to the promised land. Laval over Sherbrooke by a comfortable margin. Arnaud Desjardins making a case for the Hec Crighton. Probably has to do some catching up to Mason Nyhouse. 22 of 32 for 273 and a TD. Ben Hewitt with a great day on defense with 6 tackles and a breakup for the green and gold. Well, it's a time of the year coming out of the Thanksgiving season that we try to focus on who has the pole position for the Hec Crighton Award. Who's at the front of the pack for you, Mike?
Right now it's Mason Nyhus, and I don't think it's really close at this stage. I thought before the season it would be a 2-horse race between Nyhus and Keon Edwards, the running back at Western. But I think at Western, Edwards gets caught in that multiple back rotation where along with Edward Wanati. You've got two guys who are in the top 4 in USports in rushing. So you can look at his numbers being affected by 200 or 300 yards, maybe, just because they split the carries so much. But Nias has been, as advertised, 350 yards a game, 11 touchdowns and just 1 interception. I thought the 2-horse race at the beginning of the season is now pretty clear cut in my eyes for who's going to win the Crighton.
I would agree. And not only has Mason Nias had a heck caliber season so far, but if you look at the other 3 conferences, it's not even really clear at this point who the MVP of that conference is. You know, Mike, you touched on Keon Edwards sharing the carries and his numbers being watered down by that. That's a guy that we thought would be a very clear-cut heck favorite from the outset this year. But there's an argument that on the whole, Evan Hillocks maybe had a better season statistically. And you get to Quebec and you see Arnaud Desjardins, the Laval quarterback, has had a hot last 3 games. He's really picking up steam there, but he wasn't a guy that was really on our radar at the outset of the season, and his numbers don't necessarily jump off the page either. Head out to the Atlantic Conference. I think Malcolm Bussey might be the guy at this point in time, the running back at St. FX, who's been far and away the best team in that conference. But again, you need numbers that jump off the page, especially as a non-quarterback, to even compete for this. So that's a roundabout way of saying it, but I do agree with Mike that I think Nias is kind of head and shoulders above the crowd at this point in time.
So for the last few weeks of the regular season in USport, is there any possibility of any movement, especially at the top end of the standings in each of these conferences, Gord?
Well, at the risk of being a hot take artist, you know, there might be some possibility of changes at the top of these standings. There's a couple games that I'm a little bit intrigued by that could potentially shake things up. The first one being this upcoming weekend as Regina travels to Saskatoon to take on the Huskies. Now, these two teams played a very, very tight first game in Regina, and the Rams have looked pretty clearly to be the second best team in the conference for most of the season. So if the Canada West is going to be shaken up at all, it's probably this upcoming weekend in that Battle of Saskatchewan. And then the other game that I have my eyes on, and I'm not going out on a limb and declaring an upset here, but I am very much intrigued by Western traveling to Ottawa in a couple weeks' time to take on the GGs. The GGs have really been coming on strong this season. They've made an argument as the second best team in the OUA. Yes, they lost to Queens, the other team, in that argument, but don't forget, that was a really disjointed game with a weather delay, ended up very tight. So I think there's a significant argument that Ottawa is right in the picture here, and they get their shot at Western in a couple weeks' time. If anybody's going to slow down that attack, maybe Ottawa is the one that can actually give them a shot. But those are the two games that really catch my eye if we're looking for any kind of a shakeup moving forward.
I think if you're going to see a shakeup, it's at the second tier. I think Saskatchewan has established itself as a heavy favorite out west. Likewise, Western. Likewise, X. And then let's go and throw rocks at each other in the Dunsmore Cup final again and see who survives Montreal and Laval. That winner is going to go to Western this year. I think this will be Western's year, especially with the carrot of hosting the Vanier this year. Saskatchewan will go and kick the crap out of whoever they play out of the East. And then Saskatchewan Western. I will be stunned at this stage of the season. Well, maybe not stunned, but at least moderately surprised if it's anybody but, Western and Saskatchewan. Although I certainly give the teams out of Quebec more than a puncher's chance of getting through. But if there's going to be a shakeup, it's going to be at the second tier, not at the top of the conferences.
Coming up, it is the Fashion Police. Welcome back. Here are your CJFL standings on the road to the Canadian Bowl. Okay, super happy fun time here on Gridiron Nation. I like doing this every year. A uniform review. Guys, your favorites, the ones you don't like, and what are your old standbys?
Okay, I'm going to give a shout out to a couple favorites of mine. The first is a team that just always seems to knock uniforms out of the park, and that's Utah. I don't care what they roll out on any given week. They are always bringing out slick looks. They go red-white looks. They go black and red looks. They get the UU badge on the helmet. They get the whatever that is, Dreamcatcher badge on the helmet. They've got a lot of different great looks that are always sharp, it seems, every week. And they look even sharper when my Bruins are beating them at the Rose Bowl. Special addition and my special shout out for a one-time off uniform. Boston College wears the really good 9/11 tribute uniforms every year with a paisley pattern in their red. Really, really sharp look. It's bandana inspired by an alumnus. That's a great look. On the flip side, two looks from this past weekend that I hated. Notre Dame out there proving Goldfinger was wrong, and there can in fact be too much gold with the uniforms they wore against BYU. Those were awful. And then the Tennessee, I think that was supposed to be like the Smoky Mountains tribute or something like that, but that was terrible too. It was like a charcoal and pale orange combination. Did not look good, despite the fact that the football team wearing them did.
If I want to go to the NCAA, and this is really tough for a guy who's loved Notre Dame since he was a kid, I love Michigan's uniforms. I've always loved the claw helmet. It's distinctive, and they wear it so well, and it just oozes fall to me when I see those guys on TV. Alternatively, I hate Maryland's. There's nothing positive about that flag look that they wear, whether it be on the helmet, whether it be on the shoulders. Not a fan at all. And I'll throw this one up. This is a softball for Gord. I love the classic UCLA uniforms. Just adore them. They're unique. It's a great color scheme. You wear those sky blue uniforms, I put me down as in favor of those every time.
Yeah, my personal opinion is those are the best uniforms in college sports for sure. When you're talking about Michigan, let's talk about the Canadian side of things, and I'll start with Canada's Michigan. That Windsor look that they've gone to a couple years ago that is very clearly, I would say, Michigan inspired, but they really lean into the all navy blue. There isn't anywhere near as much of the yellow trim, and I find it to be a really sharp look. They always look good week in, week out. The other team that is kind of a surprising leader in this category for me is Sherbrooke. They do a great job of mixing the green, the gold. They'll mix in some gray as a trim in a few different places, and I find that they roll out a handful of different sets that all look really good. On the flip side, one uniform I've seen take a lot of airtime this year that I really haven't liked is that gold set that Regina rolls out. They've done it a few times this year. I just think that it's a little too washed out, and especially when you already have a gold team in your conference like Manitoba, I just feel like it's a little bit unnecessary, and I don't think it looks great.
Yeah, I'm going to go. I want to, the Windsor thing. I'm really happy that they went to the W on the helmet, inspired by the claw. That looks great, especially for marketing in that neck of the woods. I love the classic Alberta uniforms. I like the color schemes. I've always liked the old school Edmonton Dynasty uniforms as well, and the fact that they've continued that tradition with a unique color combination, put me in favor of that. I don't care what the school is in terms of negatives, and I don't care if this is university or pro. I hate white on white uniforms. Give me contrast. I know players, certainly with the Argos, love the white and white or the blue on blue look. I'm old school that way. I like contrast, which is completely contradictory to my old school uniform, and that's the classic Queens uniforms. The tricolor, where they have sort of the UCLA striping with the red and blue on the shoulder, and then down the pant leg as well. I love those uniforms. Maybe it's because of what I grew up with, and the fact that they returned to the numbers on the helmets to really go old school. I really like the look and kind of incorporating the history. But yeah, I know it's either a love-hate thing with those all gold uniforms. I love them.
Coming up, it is our picks of the week. Welcome back, everyone. Time for our game previews, and Gord is going to double up for us.
I am indeed, because we have a couple really juicy top 20 matchups. I'll start with number 10 Penn State traveling to the Big House to take on the number 5 Michigan Wolverines. And the Wolverines, perfect on the season so far, as are Penn State, I should point out, right on the edge of that playoff picture in what is still a 14 playoff situation. But the one question on the Wolverines has been, have they really been tested to date? They've had 2 of the easier conference games to open up in Indiana and Maryland. Penn State, on the other hand, is their first real test, and a couple Canadians will contribute to this Penn State roster in Theo Johnson, the tight end, and Jonathan Sutherland, the linebacker defensive back hybrid. So those are a couple guys to keep an eye on in one of the biggest games of the week. And one of the other big games of the week is number 15 NC State traveling to Syracuse to take on the surprising Syracuse Orangemen, 18th in the country. And Syracuse rolls out also a couple Canadians. Damian Alford, we talked about a couple of times on the show. But guys, I think one of our biggest omissions on the show this season so far has been not talking about Matthew Bergeron, who is starting his 32nd consecutive game for Syracuse at tackle in this upcoming weekend. This is a guy that, again, I think is a slam dunk to at least be seen in the CFL, but he's got an NFL body and I think a legitimate chance to open some NFL eyes and end up on a roster down south if he keeps things up on a Syracuse roster that all of a sudden has carried them into the top 25 in real national conversations. So that's a good game to keep an eye on as well.
I'll focus on a game and a player that we've already focused on in terms of Kurtis Rourke as the Ohio Bobcats go to Western Michigan this week. Both teams 1-1 in MAC play, and this becomes a big game for Ohio right now because they don't want to fall too far behind Buffalo, who have gotten off to a 3-0 start in MAC East. So at 1-1 in conference play, 3-3 overall, this is a really important game for Ohio. Likewise, Western Michigan 1-1. They're only 2-4. In overall play this year. So when you're looking at this from the Kurtis Rourke perspective, this is an opportunity to make sure that they can solidify a playoff spot. And, we'll see how they do in action this week.
What have we got in the home and native, boys?
Well, let's start in Ontario, and we will go with McMaster taking on Queens this week. And it's a huge game for both teams for different reasons. Queens is looking for that number 2 seed, and there's no bye in Ontario this week. They expanded the playoffs. Now you've got 7 teams making it, so it's 2 versus 7 in the first round, as opposed to in years gone by getting that bye. But you want to avoid Western as much as possible, and to do that, to clinch either the 2 or 3 spot as quickly as possible. Tied with Ottawa right now, Laurier only a game back. It's a really important game for them, and they also want to be able to host that game to lead up to the Yates Cup. So a big game for them. For McMaster, the suspension and the loss against York for using an ineligible player really becomes large at this point. They've got to go into Kingston. They really need the win badly because next week they've got Toronto, who they're currently 2 points behind in the standings. If they don't win this week, they're still on the outside looking in at a playoff spot and then face an absolute must-win game next week, and the Marauders don't want to face that, and they can go a long way into solidifying a playoff spot with a win in Kingston.
For me, I already alluded to it earlier in the show, but Regina travels to Saskatoon this upcoming weekend, and that is the biggest game remaining on the Canada West regular season schedule, in my opinion. These two teams played to a 1-point game in their first meeting, and Regina, as I said earlier, has looked like the second best team in the conference for the majority of the regular season. And Noah Pelche, the first-year starter at quarterback for them, has been outstanding. Their defense, led by BC Lions draft pick Ryder Varga returning, has also been outstanding. Anthony Bennett on the defensive line has been a real standout at that level too. It's probably the best defense in the conference going against what is probably the best offense in the conference, hands down. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And Regina, the one team that can historically handle that trip to Saskatoon fairly well. I know it's not far for them. It's not that much out of their comfort zone. So I think this will be a pretty even matchup. And I'm really hoping, actually, just the journalist in me, that Regina gives Saskatchewan a good run, maybe even takes them down, just to add a little extra layer of intrigue to the tail end of the Canada West season.
For everyone on Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullen saying, let's get out to the game.